Estate Secrets, the latest novel by John W. Goodland, is now available for order and download. This special episode of the Brewing Fiction podcast coincides with the release of his fourth novel. John, a Newfoundland and Labrador author, shares his journey, his writing process, and how he achieves fulfillment through writing. He also discusses his perspective on the role of history in crafting historical fiction. Welcome to the Brewing Fiction podcast. Hello again from the land of the living skies. I'm your host, Keith Leonard, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to welcome fellow Newfoundland and Labradorian author John W. Goodland. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited.
You and I have been trying to get together to do this for a little while, but I thought there was no better time than right now at the launch of your newest book. All right. So as I always like to do, we like to start the podcast with Author's Corner, where you, John, get to tell a little bit more about yourself and let the listeners in on who you are as a writer.
I guess as a writer, I started writing in 2020 during COVID, which a tremendous number of people did. And I was kind of inspired by, so my reading background is primarily historical fiction. Started off with Westerns when I was really young, and it kind of evolved into historical fiction. And during COVID, I actually heard a news story on online, and it was talking about how there was someone was speculating that there was a potential mass grave up on Signal Hill, which is in downtown St. John's. Most people that are familiar with St. John's would know about Signal Hill. And mass grave of French soldiers from one of the battles of Signal Hill. And that got me thinking, well, there's a tremendous amount of history in this province that people don't know anything about. So I started to do a little bit of research, and that's where my first novel, The Siege of Carbonear Island, came from, because that involved the Avalon Peninsula campaign, which I knew nothing about. So I said, hey, let's try and make a story about it. It kind of went from there. So I started writing then, did one, and we can talk more about the details of how that all went and stuff.
Sure.
And then the second novel just became a test to see, all right, well, I did one. Was that a one-off fluke, or will I do another?
Yeah.
And here I am now with number 4. So it's been a journey.
The one that I've been following along with, which is you talk about you didn't know anything about, well, basically anything about, let's say, the Newfoundland participation in the war, right? But Siege, I read it thinking I was reading a school novel instead of fiction. So I was like, okay, how much is real? How much isn't?
When I first put it out, it was just called The Siege of Carbonear Island. A couple of prints later, I added a novel to it, to the cover, to give people the idea that, you know, this is a novel, this is a story, this is not a history book, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
So did you receive feedback from people in your first couple of issues that they felt it was more historical than fiction?
Not so much. I think, well, I had a couple of comments that, I didn't realize. And then so I made that change. And then I think sales picked up, a little bit. I'm self-published, so sales are dubious.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was, again, it was just one of those things I needed to learn, that if you're trying to draw people in, and we can talk about the cover after. I know you've got a question there later about the covers. That was something else I had to learn. So, it was a thing I always wanted to do. It was a thing I tried, and then there's been a whole lot of learning since.
Right on. Good. Well, that's what we're here for. We want to learn what you've learned.
And just one little thing I wanted to throw in there, because I've told this story to a bunch of people, actually.
Okay.
So, for your listeners, just a little bit of an insight into your host. Myself and Keith lived in the same house together 100 years ago, back when we were in university. And we both always had this reverence for books, I would say. And the example I used of that, and I've told the story many times, is when we were living in this house, there was a bunch of us living there. We were going to set up a dartboard one time. I don't know if you remember that, Keith.
I
And
don't.
we were concerned about if we set the dartboard up, we might get holes in the wall and the landlord might get upset. So we were trying to figure out, well, what are we going to put around the dartboard so that we don't get holes in the wall? And one of our friends who was there at the time, I won't name him, but one of our friends said, well, you guys have lots of books, just put books around it. And I remember at the time distinctly, you and I went, as if to say, how dare you suggest such a thing? So when I later discovered that you were writing as well, I was like, I'm not surprised.
Not surprised, yeah. Oh, so, dude, it's been a while.
It's been a long time.
Nice memory. Awesome. All right. Let's have a little bit more fun here.
All right.
I'm going to do what I like to call Fast Five. And it's just a couple of word pairs at you. You pick one or the other. And just a little bit more of getting to know John.
Sure.
All right. Paperback or ebook?
That's a tough one.
I know.
I can say that I read mostly ebooks. A number of years ago, I was given a Kobo, and I think I saw the other day I've got just under 200 books on that. Just because of convenience of I need a new book because I always have a book on the go. Yeah, I don't always have time to go to the bookstore.
Right.
But I love the feel and the smell of a paperback. I never crack the spine, never open it far enough so you crack the spine, the smell of when you open it. So that's a tough one.
It is. I love throwing that in there because everybody struggles. It's technology versus what we really love, right? Technology is all about the convenience, but nothing beats good old paper. And
oh yeah, just the feel of it, and I don't know, something about a novel.
It is so. All right. Are you a daytime or a nighttime writer?
Daytime.
Daytime. Okay. Early?
When I am writing, typically my writing would be I'm up on a Sunday morning before everybody else gets up, and I can usually pound out a couple of thousand words before everyone else in the house stirs.
Right. Nice. Saturday, Sunday are mine. Same thing. Cabin in the woods or a city cafe for writing?
For writing? I think I'd take a cabin in the woods.
I knew you would. Are you coffee or a tea drinker?
Coffee.
All the way?
All the way.
And do you go on writing sprints or marathons?
I would say up until recently, I've been on a marathon. I've never done a sprint. It's just been consistently, and I noticed, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I've been just consistently writing for the past couple of years up until about February of this year.
Okay. All right. We are going to talk about something you're currently working on. So I think the biggest thing for me is I want to hear about your newest novel. But before we do that, are you into already started something new? A sneak peek? Is there anything you can share with us?
Yeah. So my first 3 novels were historical fiction. The latest one, which is just released on Amazon, and I don't even have paper copies yet, they're on the way, is just fiction. And I do have one in the works now, and by in the works, I've got some research done. I've got my chapters laid out. I just haven't written them. And that is also historical fiction. And it was
okay.
What I like to write is I like to find these little pieces of history, one-liners. So Rogues and Waves was based on a paragraph that I found in history that ended with, and everybody perished except for one boy who was strapped to the mast of a ship. And my mind exploded. Well, who was this boy? What happened to him? So that's where that story came from.
Wow.
There's no history to say who he was.
Right.
So the newest one is about the last prison ship that was sent from Dublin in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Can't remember now. It's been a while since I looked at it. But anyway, the last prison ship that was sent was supposed to go to Australia, and the captain went rogue and came to Newfoundland. And when he got to Newfoundland, he dumped the prisoners in local communities, Babels and Witless Bay, and they all, of course, ended up in St. John's. Created a bit of havoc, being 120 prisoners. But the interesting part of this story is, of those 120 prisoners, 12 were women. And what the history records is when they were all rounded up, they rounded up the men and 6 of the women and shipped them off. And again, my mind exploded to say, okay, but what about the other 6 women? Like, what happened to them? That's kind of where I want to go with this new one, is to create stories around, so to tell the history of what happened and how they got here, and then create some stories around, well, who could these 6 women have been and what could have possibly happened to them? And, we'll see if I get there.
Yeah, sounds awesome. The Other 6, there's your title.
Yeah, you know what? I've toyed with a couple. I had, the 6 Irish ladies, or the other 6. Yeah. The other 6 is grabbing me. I can see that happening.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, we'll jump into the interview portion, and I know a couple we've kind of touched on just by chatting here. Share a little bit about your writing process. So, like rituals, routines. I know you talked that you're up before everybody else, and that gives you some peace and quiet time. Mm-hmm. Do you have a routine that you follow before you sit and write?
You mean like per session type of thing?
Yeah. Is there a routine per se that you have other than sitting at your desk, or?
Not much, really. No, it's kind of like this morning. Grab a coffee. Yeah. And head down and see where it goes.
Okay.
I find I'm generally, when I'm in the middle of a book, I'm generally thinking about it all the time anyway.
Fair.
So, typically it's okay, I got this idea in my head, so let's get a coffee and go down and see where the writing and the words take me from there.
Okay. So with your novels now, with these ideas, do you write a chunk based on what's rolling around when you wake up? Like if you get a scene and it might be the end of the book, or do you kind of write a little more of a natural timeline?
Yeah, I'm a natural timeline. Okay. I typically, what I'll do when I start off is I'll have the idea. I'll typically map out the number of chapters that I want and what each one is briefly going to touch on.
Okay.
Typically then, as time goes on, so it might be 1 or 2 lines. This chapter is going to be this.
Yeah.
As time goes on, while I'm working on, say, chapter 1 or 2, I might have an idea that, okay, well, when I get over here further, I'm going to want to touch a bit more. So then I'll go add a couple more bullet notes to, say, 11 or 12. Mm-hmm. Then I'm back writing, and so that's kind of my process. It's I'm writing on whatever chapter is next, but if I get an idea about what's something that I need to cover off or want to cover off, then I'll go and leave a bullet, and then when I get there, I'll see if it all makes sense to put it in or not, or change it. Or
Gotcha. I like it. Okay. What program do you use to write for the bullet notes and that kind of stuff?
Just old-fashioned Word, Microsoft Word. So when I did my first one, I just wrote in Word, and I just wrote it like a manuscript, straight down. Yeah. And then, of course, like I said, I'm self-published, so I use KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing with Amazon. Yeah. And they have a whole process there that you can go through about how to format and how to set your gutters and all that stuff, which was a bit overwhelming the first time. So when I sat down to write the second novel, I figured I'd cheat a little bit, and I didn't write it as a manuscript. I just used the formatting from my first one, deleted all the words, and then started a fresh book in the formatting. So, and that's what I've been doing since. So now when I have my chapters laid out for, the 6, we'll say that it's in the right format. It's just I've got the bullet points in there.
Okay. Good. Yeah. I saw a few screenshots. I'm like, oh, okay. I wonder what program he's using. No, you know what? Word, Google Docs. I think sometimes would-be authors and new writers think that you're going to have a better story or a better outcome if you use, I speak for myself, and I'm sure there are other listeners who are going to say, yeah, I thought that way. The app is going to help you write a better story. How many hours per day? And again, obviously, I know you're a very busy guy, which we'll talk about in a little while here, but do you have a set number of hours you like to work on your writing per day or per week?
When I'm really in a groove of writing, I'll typically it's a Sunday morning. Saturday mornings are busy. typically it's a Sunday morning. It's the quietest in the house, so I might be up by 6, and I'm pulling myself away from it by 9:30 because all right, it's time for me to go and get breakfast made for the crew type of thing. That's my main time, 3-4 hours on a Sunday morning.
Okay.
If I manage to get to it through the week, it might only be half hour there, 40 minutes here, which is tough because in that amount of time, it's really hard to get an idea out of your head on the page.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I'm usually a 3 or 4 hour because it takes me an hour to get in the groove. I've interviewed others on the podcast and they talk about, I can, something pops in my mind. I'll take 15 minutes, write a drabble or a microfiction story. And I'm like, I'm not even ready to start typing in 15 minutes.
It takes me that long to open the computer and open the program and figure, okay, now where was I?
Where was I? Yeah.
Yeah. God love them if they can do that, man. That's a step above, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Do you leave a few notes of your, where you are in your mind and in the story, or do you just kind of go from the bullet points and stuff that you had prior to?
Usually it's the bullet points, but typically before I wrap up, if there's something that I'm really trying to get to but I didn't quite, then I'll leave a new bullet point so that when I go back and look, I'll read my last paragraph or two, look at the notes, and all right, yeah, here we go. And
that's where I was. Yeah. Okay, right on. Well, you know what? Since we touched on, let's talk about how active you are with your kids. I mean, your kids are all athletes, and we talked a little bit offline. Basketball and swimming and all the fun stuff that goes with 3 of those involved. How do you find time working full time and then working triple time, trying to keep the kids active and entertained? How do you find time to write?
It's been a challenge. So Sunday mornings have been the only morning where nobody's scheduled to be anywhere. So as you mentioned, my kids. So 3 of my kids are swimmers. My oldest swims 9 times a week. The twins swim 7 or 8 times a week between early mornings and evenings and stuff. But they've never had booked swimming on Sunday morning or Sunday at all. So that's how Sunday kind of evolved into, well, this is a time for me because I don't have to get up at 5:30 and bring them to the pool. I don't have to be running around in the evenings. And that works well and has worked well. Basketball, the twins play basketball, and that kind of took over our lives this year because when there's a tournament going on or when there's a swim meet going on, then Sunday mornings are not free anymore.
Right, yeah.
So this past winter was really tough. As I mentioned offline, we had 9 basketball tournaments over 11 weekends. One of the weekends in between where we didn't have a basketball tournament, we had a swim meet. So really there's been no writing that's happened since, I'd say, late January of this year. It's been a really dry spell, and I'm really struggling to get back at it. I keep telling myself I will. Our last major sporting event for this year is coming up this weekend ahead, and then maybe I'll get some time to go back at it, but I don't know. But it's tough. My kids are really active, which is great. Our theory has always been your kids are going to hang out at the pool or behind the pool, or at the stadium, behind the stadium, at the school, behind the school, whatever. So we've made the choice to keep them busy, and they're hanging out at the pool and at the school as opposed to behind. So, it's been a choice. It's a time investment, but writing is, on the back burner. But writing came along after they were involved in all this stuff. So it wasn't like I was highly or heavily involved and then had to change things because now they're very active. They were always very active, and I had to fit the writing around that anyway.
Fair enough. Is your writing more a relaxation thing for you then? So you picked it up during COVID, and like you said, we all had extra time at that point. So do you see it now just, first of all, it's your time, right? Because, again, you have some downtime. But Do you find it relaxing, or is it a chore to sit down?
Generally speaking, very relaxing yet exciting. So I've always had a very active mind. It's taken me a long time to realize that. So, for example, the reason I read ebooks is because my primary reading time is in the morning when I'm getting ready for work. So I'll read while I'm listening to music, while I'm on my exercise bike. So I do all three at the one time. So that's gives you an indication of what my brain is like. So writing came along and was a great way to focus my mind into a particular thing. So when I sit down to write, I'm generally excited because I've thought about, well, here's what I want to do with the character, or here's who I'm going to kill off, or which is the amazing part of writing is, that
you can murder
godlike,
without.
that godlike ability to just take someone out or erase them type of thing. So it's, but relaxing, fulfilling, just digging into that creative side that I didn't really know I needed to dig into. It's been providing an outlet for that, we'll say.
Awesome. Good. I know we kind of touched on it for maybe one of your books, but your ideas for your novels come from the world around you then?
So, yeah, the historical fiction ones were that. It was, hey, look at this little bit of history. This is a story that people need to know about. And I'll just put my story around this little bit of history. The last one, Estate Secrets, is purely fiction, but it parallels work that I was doing fairly recently, that I'm not doing anymore. So it was, so the inspiration for that was to see if I could do a story that people that aren't really interested in historical fiction might pick up and might enjoy. And it's kind of set up so that if it does become that, then there's sequels that can come from it. That was the thought process behind Estate Secrets.
Okay. So Estate Secrets, you kind of stepped outside of your comfort zone. Do you see yourself going into any other genres? I mean, you read a lot of Westerns. I remember Louis L'Amour novels back in the day.
I was on a campaign to collect all of them at one point because I think there was like 120 different ones. I never did fulfill that destiny. At this point, I don't know. I think I do have in the back of my mind, I do like, and I'm terrible with knowing what genres are. Like I saw the word.
Me too. No worries.
There's a word on here somewhere, dystopian. I don't even know what that is. But I know a lot of people do it. It's great. God love you. Fill your boots. Happy for you. I don't know what it is. Maybe I've read it and didn't realize.
Right.
But like, your Lord of the Rings. So like that fantasy world. Harry Potter. I could see me. So there's been a process to it. The thing about historical fiction is the history is a character. And that character kind of sets your timeline because it's real history.
Yeah.
And people that know the history, because you will no matter what your story is, you will always find somebody who knows that story, who knows that history. And if you haven't been true to the history, they're going to tell you.
Yeah.
So the benefit of starting with historical fiction is the history is a character and it has a timeline, and your job is to follow along with the timeline and fill in a story around it. So that's, in one sense, it's easy, but it also requires a lot of history or a lot of research to make sure you're getting it right. When I tried this just general fiction, I didn't have that character and I didn't have that progress, but I have much more freedom. So in that sense, there's your give and take. So having done both of those now, I could see me going into a fantasy world. If I can come up with a good idea, which I'm still noodling around on things, I could see me going there because then that's your ultimate freedom. Because in my general fiction, the story takes place in and around Newfoundland, primarily here in St. John's. So again, you have to be true to where you are, because if in your story you randomly put a building somewhere where there's not, somebody's going to tell you, there's no building there. What are you talking about? That's a park or whatever. But I could see me going to fantasy, Hunger Games, that because you create everything.
Yes.
which I can see being very freeing, but then also very labor intensive. Because if I tell a story that's based in St. John's, if anybody's familiar with St. John's, then I don't have to go into the level of detail to describe the scene around.
Right.
Because if I tell you it's at the Basilica and you're familiar with the Basilica, all right, oh yeah, I know what's around there. If you're doing a fantasy world, I can see it taking a much more detail to kind of paint the picture for the reader to say, all right, here's what's going on and here's why what I'm saying and what the character is doing makes sense.
Gotcha.
But I could see me probably trying that if I could come up with a something. I don't know. Haven't quite found that thing yet, right?
Okay. That's interesting how you use history as a character. I've never thought of it. Now, I don't write historical fiction. I struggle with research.
Right.
I don't want to be fact checked. So everything I write is 100% from inside my head. So It is a little more labor intensive trying to present the world building and the character building, right? But interesting how you use that as a character history.
And you know, so in Rogues and Waves, there's a scene where the main character Cormac, he arrives in Ireland and he meets his uncle, and his uncle has 2 horses with him to go back to the homestead. So that made me pause and say, well, okay, in 18th century Ireland, what kind of horses we got? Now, in the book, it mentions 2 black horses of approximately shoulder height or whatever it says. It took me, I don't know, several hours to go through and do the research to see what kind of horses would have been available to Irish people at that time, knowing the English influence and the persecution of Catholics and all this stuff that was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of horses would they have had available to them, and what would they have been allowed to own? Right. So it's that level of, you go into the history that far, and it might get 2 sentences in the novel,
Right.
So it's thinking about, well, like something silly like, all right, did the river meander that way at the time? So it's a character in that sense, but it also requires a lot of time to get there. So maybe fantasy stuff wouldn't be as anymore. It's just would take less research, but more time building.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair. I'll never write historical fiction because I'm terrified just from the 2 minutes you just shared how much research you put in about horses.
Yeah, well, there you go, right? But
mine got 4 legs and a head, buddy. That's all I can tell you about my horses.
maybe a tail, maybe not.
Maybe not. So research is online, or do you read a lot of other history books for your research?
I would say to this point I've only ever done online. So, okay. With that requires a bit of fact checking, because of course, just because it's online doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
So typically trying to find a couple of different sources that you hope are reliable sources that give you the information.
Right.
Yeah, no, haven't gone to libraries to kind of pick up a real book, and because again, it's time, right? So
yeah, for sure.
Hey, I got an hour now. I'll do some research. I'll get on the computer and see what I can find, type of thing, right?
Nice. Cool. So obviously you're a plotter then in your writing and preparing a story and preparing for a novel. I don't know if you've ever heard of plotter or pantser, but
yes, I have.
Yeah, so I'm the latter. I am a total pantser. I'm not good at any outlines or anything like that. Would you consider yourself a plotter?
Maybe a bit more of a hybrid, in the sense that I have the general idea of where I want it to go.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I'm bound to that. So if I'm writing and I was thinking X was going to happen, but just the way the words are flowing that day, it looks like I'm going to go Y, then I'll let Y take on and go, and then I'll adjust after. So my plotting gives me my general idea of where I'm going, my A to Z.
Yeah.
What letters I hit in between, kind of, I'm fairly true to the plot. I'm not afraid to go a little bit, quote unquote, off script too. I think being a total pantser would scare me too much. I wouldn't be able to start.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for doing that.
Well, in fairness, you know what? I mean, I've been working on 2 separate novels for as long as I would say I've been officially writing.
Right.
And I think part of the problem for me getting there is the fact that I am a pantser, and I've got an idea of the start, or I've got the start written, an idea of the finish. Most of that is written, but the meat and potatoes in the middle I'm struggling with because I have no organization. So I think being a pantser is tough for anybody writing long form. That's why right now I play with microfiction and that kind of stuff, because start and finish, there's not a lot in between, right?
Right.
Shock at the start, shock at the finish, you're done basically. So that's why I'm enjoying that. But my ultimate goal is to get to publishing, right, a novel, and I'm struggling a little bit with that. So maybe I should learn how to be a bit more of a plotter at least, or somewhere in between, like you said. But
even an outliner. You know, I think I think if you gave yourself an outline for the in between meat and potatoes, and rather than look at the whole novel as what happens at the beginning, what happens at the end, look at each chapter kind of like that.
Yeah.
And so then you nail it, your chapter. So a little bit of an outline, high level, tops of the trees thing might kind of give you something, but
it might.
Everybody finds their way.
Well,
they don't.
Or they don't. I was going to say, I hope. I'll try and be positive about it. I had told my wife that I was going to publish by the end of 2023, 1 novel, because my ultimate goal is I want, and you have it, which I'm so envious of. I'm going to put mine right up at the top, right top of the bookshelf.
But you know what? When you get there,
because
I'll tell you what I did. I'm down in the family room. All my writing is done here. My stockpile of novels are there.
Yeah.
But up in the living room, which is not my room, the living room, there's this cabinet, and in that cabinet, my wife had put these 2 bookends with some Charles Dickens novels that I had read a few years ago.
Okay.
And so when I got my novels published, mine are gone in with Charles Dickens.
Nice.
Now,
nice. That's good company to keep.
Right? I'm not pretending that we're in the same circle at all, but I get it. You know, it was that feeling of, that's my name. I made that. I created that. And it deserves to go on the shelf where, anybody that's sitting in the living room can look and see, oh, John Goodland, oh, Charles Dickens. So I get it. I get why you want to put yours on the top shelf. Absolutely.
Well, I had that same feeling the first time I saw yours. When I saw Siege online, I think I saw it. I can't remember if I found it or if I saw your post, and I was like, what? And just seeing your name on the book was like, it didn't really register at first.
Yeah.
And so when I ordered it and when it came, I think I sent you a picture of me holding it.
You did, yeah.
Right? I mean, that in itself was a great feeling. So I can only imagine how many times more when my cover or, my book's going to be in my hands. So, yeah.
It's pretty special to be able to pick it up and say, wow.
Join us for part 2 of our chat with John, where we discuss the benefits of self-publishing, how he's able to create eye-catching covers for his novels, and how he finds motivation for writing. That and so much more next time on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Stop by the podcast homepage for links to today's guest and to see what else is brewing on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. You can find the links in the description. And don't forget to click the subscribe button to be notified whenever a new episode is released.